Welcome to Whispers in the Dark, where real horror stories echo through the silent night. Here, every whisper is a warning, and every story is a true haunting. If you have chilling experiences or unexplained encounters from real life, don't hesitate to share your story with us. Your whisper might just become a warning for others. Now, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready to step into the darkness with us. Story 1: Voices from the Basement. My name is Jeff. I'm a man living in the suburbs, a quiet place, far from the noise of the city. My wife, Carol, and I moved into this house after we got married. At first, everything seemed normal. The house was built in the 1920s, with old, dusty wood, but it had a certain charm. Our house had a basement, which the previous owner had firmly locked up. Carol and I didn't think much of it. After all, everyone has unused old spaces in their homes, right? But things began to change after a few months of living there. Strange phenomena started occurring, each time feeling as if something was watching us, following our every move. I'm not someone who scares easily, but on some nights, the unexplainable sounds kept me wide awake. And all those sounds came from the basement. One night, while I was watching TV and Carol was getting ready for bed, I heard a light tapping. At first, I thought I had imagined it. But then the tapping came again, irregular, but definitely there. It sounded like someone was gently knocking on the wall with an object. I looked over at Carol. She didn't notice anything, too engrossed in her book. I stood up and tiptoed toward the living room door. Nothing there. The tapping sounded again, this time closer. It felt like it was coming from beneath the basement. I started to feel uneasy. Our basement had no windows, and the entrance was hidden behind an old iron door that had been locked since we moved in. I decided to go down and check, though I had no real reason to. When I opened the door to the basement, an icy cold air immediately rushed out. I turned on my flashlight and slowly descended the creaky stairs. Anyone in that situation would have felt uncomfortable. The cold wasn't just from the air, it felt alive, like something was living down there. I stepped into the basement, and as soon as I set foot on the last step, I sensed a presence. Someone or something was there. I can't explain it, but it felt like someone was standing nearby, watching me from the darkness. I turned to look, but saw no one. Just long shadows cast by old boxes and discarded items piled around. I moved closer to a dark corner, where the knocking seemed to have come from. From there, I could hear faint whispers, indistinct, as if people were conversing softly. Fear gripped me, but I took a few more steps. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. An eerie silence filled the room. The air grew even colder and heavier. I turned around, but just as I did, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving faintly across the far corner. It felt like someone had just left or was still standing there. just a few feet away. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Had I imagined it? But I couldn't shake the feeling, the shadow, that something was still lurking there. That night, I decided I had to check again. But this time, I wasn't going alone. After hearing my story, Carol agreed to come with me. Both of us descended into the basement, but I no longer felt brave. When I opened the basement door, a cold gust slammed into my face, as if something was trying to keep me out. Carol held my hand tightly, and together we walked down the stairs. At the bottom, I caught a glimpse of a dim light from an old lamp, and for a brief second, I saw a figure standing near one of the boxes. We froze, unable to move. The figure stood still, with only its glowing eyes visible in the darkness. I couldn't tell what it was, I only knew something was staring straight at me, making it hard to breathe. And then, as I tried to leave, I felt a freezing hand grip my wrist. I turned around and saw a bloodied, pale face, blurred and undefined. A deep sigh echoed behind me, and then the darkness swallowed everything. We fled the house immediately and only returned a few days later to pack our belongings. Strangely, when we entered the basement again, the door was tightly shut, and there was no sign of any disturbance. But as I stood before the door, I heard a soft whisper in my ear. "You will never leave." A chilling sensation seized my mind, and I knew that the house, even though we had left, was still watching us. When we moved into our new home, everything seemed fine until one night when I was sitting alone and heard whispering in the wind again. The sound had returned, and I realized that we might never truly escape the ghosts that had followed us through the years. Did this story send chills down your spine? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Story 2, The Forgotten Cellar. My name is Alex, and I'm here to tell you about a trip I will never forget. It wasn't a thrilling adventure, but a horrifying experience that, to this day, I still cannot explain. In 1975, my 4 best friends and I decided to explore an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The house had been deserted for decades, and local residents claimed it was once home to a wealthy family who mysteriously disappeared. Stories about the house were passed down from generation to generation, filled with bizarre rumors of strange occurrences and the unexplained disappearances of those who once lived there. Our group, me, Jake, Laura, Ben, and Sarah, were all adventure seekers. Nothing could stop us once we set our minds to exploring that house one summer afternoon. We had heard all the ghost stories, but none of us really believed in the supernatural. To us, it was just a game, a test of courage. The house stood in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by towering, ancient trees. It was covered in layers of green moss, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. Broken windows, cracked walls, and an overwhelming atmosphere of gloom surrounded it. Still, we decided to go inside without a second thought. As soon as we stepped in, I could sense something was wrong. A heavy, musty smell filled the air, an eerie silence blanketed everything, and the darkness seemed to seep into every corner. But none of us said a word. We were all chasing that rush of exploring the unknown, and this was the perfect opportunity. After passing through a few decrepit rooms, we found a door leading downward. It was barred shut with an old wooden plank. Jake and I worked together to force it open. After a few minutes, we succeeded and revealed a staircase leading down into a cellar. A chill rose up from the depths, as if something was waiting to greet us. "Let's go down," Laura said, her voice tinged with both nervousness and excitement. "Whatever's down there is bound to be interesting." But none of us realized the cellar was nothing like we imagined. There was a heavy feeling, like we were being watched from the darkness. Even though nothing had happened yet, the sensation was impossible to shake. At that moment, Ben volunteered to go first. He was always the brave one, constantly seeking to test his limits. "I'll go down first. You guys wait here," he said. Without waiting for our response, he disappeared down the stairs. We stood at the top, peering into the shadows. Ben moved out of sight, and soon, we could only hear his footsteps echoing from below. A few minutes passed, and then, silence. Sarah began to fidget nervously. "Something's not right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't feel safe here." We decided to follow him down. But when we reached the bottom of the stairs, Ben was gone. We spread out across the basement to search. It was murky and freezing cold, with only empty crates and old, broken furniture scattered around. But no sign of Ben. Suddenly, we heard Ben's voice calling from a dark corner of the room. "Come over here," he said. But his voice sounded off, not like before. "There's something you need to see." We cautiously approached, our flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. In the beam of light, we saw an old iron door, and then, in that gloomy cellar, we witnessed something we could barely comprehend. Ben stood there, his eyes wide open, mouth agape, but utterly lifeless. We were frozen in shock. None of us could comprehend what we were seeing. Ben wasn't Ben anymore. He was dead. And there was no clear reason why. Just as we prepared to leave and call the police, a noise from deep within the cellar made us turn around. Someone or something was moving. Softly, but unmistakably there, hidden in the shadows. We ran toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. And then, the noises grew louder, footsteps, deliberate and nearing. Panic set in. We tried to call for help, but our phones were useless, no signal at all. It was as if the house had cut us off completely. Meanwhile, the footsteps grew closer and closer. After what felt like an eternity, the cellar door suddenly swung open, and we bolted outside. When the police finally arrived, they found no trace of anyone else in the house. But what they did find in the cellar chilled us to the bone: countless headless, skeletal remains scattered across the floor. Every single body had been brutally murdered, and yet, there were no clues left behind. Over the years, investigations turned up nothing. But 50 years later, a shocking discovery was made. A skeleton was found in a nearby cave, and DNA analysis revealed it was the killer, the one who had turned that house into a graveyard. The most terrifying part? According to the final investigative reports, the murderer had once lived in that very house, and perhaps, he had never truly died. Surely this story must have given you chills at least once. What those young friends went through was truly a nightmare, and even more frightening are the mysteries that remain unsolved. Could the killer still be lurking somewhere out there in the shadows? If you felt scared or have any thoughts about this story, don't hesitate to share your feelings in the comments below. Do you believe that strange things really exist in this world? Or could the horrors of that abandoned house be a warning from the past? We look forward to hearing from you, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next terrifying story. Story 3, The Cry of the Basement. My name is Maria, and I've lived in an old house in a small town for many years. This house had a basement that always terrified me whenever I passed by, even though there was no obvious reason. It was just a dark, underground room with tiny windows, covered by filthy curtains. But when I heard strange noises from below one night, everything changed forever. At that time, I was 18, and my mother had decided to move into this house after my father passed away. The house was on the edge of town, far from the busy streets. My mother said it was a chance to start over, but I didn't feel that way. The quiet nights in this house always made me feel like something was wrong. One evening, after my mother had gone to bed, I decided to go down to the basement to find an old box that I knew my mother had stored there. But as soon as I stepped down the stairs, I began hearing strange noises. It sounded like crying, but not the cry of a human. It was more like the sound of a creature, weak, pleading for help. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But as I got further into the basement, the sound became clearer. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out where the crying was coming from. Suddenly, the lights in the basement flickered and went out, making me dizzy. I reached for the switch, but nothing happened. I had to use my phone's flashlight to light the way. As the beam of light from my phone illuminated a dark corner of the room, I saw a figure standing upright, even though no one was in the house at that moment. It was just a blurry, strange silhouette, indistinct, impossible to tell who or what it was. But it was standing there, just a few meters away from me, staring straight at me. A cold sensation started spreading through my body. Everything in the room seemed to be moving in slow motion, and I could hear my own breathing becoming heavier. Then, the figure suddenly vanished, as if it had never been there. I stood there for a long time, unable to move. The next morning, I tried to shake off the strange feeling, but I couldn't forget what had happened the night before. I decided to tell my mother, but she just laughed and said I must have imagined it. However, not long after that, I began hearing the same noises again, every night. Not just the weak crying I had heard the first time, but also heavy breathing, clapping sounds, as if someone was knocking on the walls from below the basement. One night, when I couldn't bear it anymore, I decided to go down to the basement to find out the truth. When I opened the door and stepped inside, all the lights in the room suddenly turned on, illuminating every dark corner. But there was no one there, just empty crates and an old cabinet, things I had seen before. However, there was one strange thing: an old wooden chair lay tilted on the floor, as if someone had just stood up and left. A sense of panic surged within me. No one was there, but I could feel a presence. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, very faint, from behind me. This time, I couldn't take it anymore and rushed out of the basement. After that, I started researching the house and its history. I discovered that it had once been home to a family in the 1920s. But there was one detail that I couldn't forget: the family had been brutally murdered in their own home. It was said that while the children were asleep, a killer attacked and killed the entire family. However, no bodies were ever found, only an empty house, abandoned for decades. One night, I went back down to the basement, and this time I didn't see the blurry figure again. But as I stood in the middle of the room, a cold gust of wind suddenly blew through, making me shiver. And then I heard a scream, very close, as if someone was crying for help right behind me. I turned around, but I only saw a cold, empty wall. At that moment, the basement door slammed shut by itself, and I couldn't open it again. I tried banging on the door and yelling, but no one could hear me. I was trapped in a dark room, where the breathing and crying sounds repeated like a nightmare. And I couldn't find a way out. Finally, when the police arrived and opened the door, they only found me sitting in a corner, drenched in cold sweat. But the strange thing was, they didn't find any trace of the incident, no explanation for what I had experienced. After that, I left the house and never went back. But the strange sounds from the basement still haunt me, and I can't explain whether I really had a supernatural experience, or if it was just my imagination. Story 4: The Forgotten Room Beneath the Stairs. My name is Ethan, and I lived in an old house on the outskirts of the city. It had been in my family for generations. The house had a long history, but it was also filled with strange stories that no one really wanted to talk about. The day I decided to search for the secrets hidden within this house was the day I will never forget. The house had a spiral staircase leading down to the basement, but beneath the stairs, in a place few paid attention to, there was an old wooden door. My mother always told me never to open it, because it led to a room that had been locked for a long time. But that only made me more curious. My mother's warnings, her anxious looks, only made me want to explore that room even more. She would never speak about it, and whenever I asked, she would simply say, "Never go near it." One afternoon, when my mother was out of the house, I decided I would find out the truth about the secret room beneath the stairs. I clearly remembered that the door wasn't locked, just an old wooden door with scratches along its surface. I felt a rising tension as I grabbed the door handle and pulled it open. Behind the door was a dark passage leading to a small room. The space was cold and dusty, as though time had stopped there. The walls were covered in green moss, and the air was musty, making it feel suffocating. But what horrified me the most was when I stepped inside, and the light from my flashlight revealed a strange object. It was an old armchair, placed in the corner of the room, and on the chair was a dark red blanket, almost as if it was hiding something. I approached it, and in the darkness, I thought I saw something moving beneath the blanket. My heart began to race. It felt like someone was watching me from behind, but I couldn't see anyone. I approached the chair, and slowly pulled the blanket away. When the blanket fell to the floor, I could hardly believe my eyes. It was a large mirror, shattered into pieces, with the fragments reflecting the image of me standing in front of it. But the strange part was, in one of the pieces of the mirror, I saw a figure standing behind me. A figure with no face, only eyes that glowed like fire, staring at me intensely. At that moment, I turned around and looked around, but there was no one in the room, only me and the broken pieces of the mirror. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was hiding somewhere in the darkness, watching me every step I took. That eerie sensation wouldn't leave me. I tried to go back to the room to head upstairs, but when I climbed a few steps, suddenly the door beneath the stairs slammed shut, causing me to jump. I couldn't open it again. At that moment, I heard strange noises coming from the room beneath the stairs. Footsteps, heavy breathing, and a soft voice whispering my name. I was so scared I could barely breathe. Cold sweat covered my body, and my heart seemed to stop beating. I tried to push the door open, but it was locked tight. I turned around and realized something horrifying. The broken pieces of the mirror in the room beneath the stairs were no longer there. They had vanished. And I saw a figure behind me in the mirror, this time clearer, with a malicious smile. A few days later, I called my mother and told her about what I had seen. She was silent for a moment before saying, "You shouldn't have opened that door. That's where your father used to go, and never came back." I stood frozen, not understanding. My mother explained that my father had been obsessed with the room beneath the stairs for years, and in the end, he couldn't escape. Since then, I never returned to that room. But there are still nights, when I'm lying in bed, I hear soft sounds coming from beneath the stairs, as if someone is trying to get out. and on those nights, I don't dare open my eyes, because I know something is still lurking in the darkness beneath the stairs, waiting for me. This story really makes you think about the strange things that could exist in old houses, doesn't it? Are there things we can't explain in this world, or mysteries that the house holds? If this story gives you chills or makes you feel something, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about the strange phenomena Ethan experienced? Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more mysterious and eerie stories to come. Story 5, The Whispering Shadows Beneath the Stairs. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah, and I want to share with you a horrifying experience I had a few years ago. It's something I'll never forget, not even for a moment. We lived in an old house in the suburbs, where everyone talked about strange occurrences that had happened before. Our house had a long history, and the stories of the people who had lived there were always tied to mysteries and inexplicable phenomena that no one dared explain. It all began on a cold winter evening when my younger brother and I decided to explore a room beneath the stairs that had been locked for a long time. Our house had a basement, and right beneath the stairs was a heavy wooden door that was always locked. Our mother had never allowed us to go in there, and whenever we asked about the room, she would simply reply with one sentence, "That's a place no one should go." But when our mother was away, my brother and I decided that this time, we wouldn't back down. The door beneath the stairs was old and heavy, but with some persistence, we managed to open it. Inside, there was a dark space, with walls covered in green moss and a cold, heavy atmosphere. Even though we couldn't see much clearly, we could feel the shift in the air, as if something was watching us from the darkness. My brother was the first to step inside, and I followed behind. We slowly ventured further in and realized that this room was not a normal one. Behind an old armchair was a strange wall, and there was a long crack in it, like a wound left behind from a long time ago. At that moment, I felt my heart race, but I thought it was just the usual fear one experiences when stepping into such a dark place. But after standing there for a few minutes, I began hearing strange sounds. Whispers, soft like someone talking right behind us. I turned around, but only saw darkness. It's probably just the wind, I reassured myself. My brother and I continued exploring further into the room. Suddenly, we heard a loud noise from behind the armchair. It was a faint but clear scream, like someone in pain. "Maybe we should leave," I said, my voice trembling. But my brother suggested that it might just be my imagination. He moved closer, pulling me along. With an unclear determination, my brother and I approached the armchair. When we looked down, I saw a rope lying in the middle of the floor. The eerie feeling intensified when I realized that this rope seemed like something someone might use to bind another person, and we weren't the only ones in this room. Just then, the whispers started again. The sounds became clearer, and we began hearing words that made no sense. It was a voice strangled, as though someone was being choked from behind. My brother suddenly turned around and screamed in horror. I quickly turned back, only to see him standing motionless, his eyes wide open, staring at something in the darkness. At that moment, I couldn't speak. In the blink of an eye, I felt a cold hand reach out from the darkness and grasp my throat. Everything around me seemed to spin. I screamed, but no one heard me. As I struggled, faint, labored breaths echoed in my ears. "Help me," the voice whispered, but it was clear enough for me to hear. The door suddenly slammed open, and I don't know how I managed to escape. But when I looked back, the room beneath the stairs was as quiet as before, with no sign of anyone or any sinister shadows. Afterward, my brother and I returned to the room and called the police. But when they arrived, they only found a few vague traces. The police said the room hadn't been opened in years and that there was definitely no one inside. However, I couldn't forget what I had witnessed. Things didn't stop there. After that night, I started having strange dreams about a man standing under the stairs, his hand reaching out as if to pull me down. I couldn't sleep peacefully for months. And one day, I decided to return to the room once again, but found nothing except a faint shadow reflected in the long broken mirror. A week later, my brother disappeared. No one knew where he was. But I am certain that something from the room beneath the stairs took him. This story makes you think about what might be hidden beneath the stairs of an old house, doesn't it? Could the room really be cursed, or is it all just Sarah's imagination? If these strange events gave you the chills, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below the video. We'd love to hear your opinion. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to not miss out on the next thrilling and scary stories. Would you dare step into that room? Story 6, The Haunted Basement of Westbrook Manor. Hello everyone, I'm Jason. Today, I'm going to tell you a real story about an old house I once lived in. It was a house located in the suburbs, over 100 years old. Westbrook Manor was the house my family and I moved into when I was a child. At the time, we had no idea about the dark history of the house. The basement of Westbrook Manor always sent chills down my spine every time I went down there. My mother often told us to stay away from the basement because it was unsafe, but my brother and I would often sneak down to play. We had no idea that behind that door, a horrifying story was waiting to be discovered. One evening, after my mother came back from work, my brother and I decided to explore the basement once again. The basement was dark and cold, always smelling of mildew. When we opened the door, the creaking of the hinges made me shiver. But at that moment, we didn't pay much attention to those sensations because our curiosity overwhelmed everything. As we stepped inside, we noticed everything was the same as before, with just a few changes. Old boxes and scattered items all over the floor, all giving off the feeling of being forgotten for a long time. However, we felt like something wasn't quite right. Strange sounds, soft heavy breathing, seemed to be coming from somewhere deep in the darkness. We continued deeper into the basement, and a loud noise startled both of us. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. We stopped, looked at each other, and felt the air grow heavy. At that moment, I began to sense the presence of something, not human. My brother was the first to approach the noise. He tiptoed toward the dark corner of the room, where an old table was covered in thick dust. As soon as he touched the table, a loud creak came from the floor beneath. And then, we saw a small door, nearly hidden by a pile of old stuff. I didn't want to get any closer, but my curiosity kept me moving forward. We decided to open the door and explore what was beneath. A strange, cold feeling filled the space, making both of us feel like we were being watched by someone. When we opened the door, a sight I will never forget appeared before us. Behind the door was a narrow passage leading to a dark room. In that room, strange drawings on the walls made me feel like something was watching me, observing me from the darkness. But the scariest part was when we saw other things, animal carcasses buried in the dirt, strange objects neatly placed on shelves. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized this was not a normal room. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, faint but clear. I turned around, but there was no one there. My brother had also started to panic, and we decided to leave immediately. But when we turned back to the door, it suddenly slammed shut, trapping us in the dark, suffocating space. Though we eventually escaped, we never dared to go near that basement again. Years later, when we moved out, the new owner of the house decided to renovate the basement. During the process, they found even more horrifying things than we had ever seen. A series of strange items, occult drawings, and even old diaries chronicling the terrifying events experienced by previous homeowners. When the police investigated, they discovered that some former owners had disappeared without a trace, and the strange items in the basement were linked to a cult that worshipped an obscure deity. Since then, no one has dared to live in that house again. This story surely sends shivers down your spine, doesn't it? Share your thoughts in the comments below the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next terrifying stories. Story 7, The Dark Secrets of the Old Library. Hello, I'm Sarah. The story I'm about to share with you happened last summer when a group of friends and I decided to explore an ancient library in a remote town. This library wasn't a prominent place. In fact, very few people even knew of its existence. But for us, lovers of history and ancient knowledge, it was like a precious gem, a place full of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. We, a group of 4 friends, had heard rumors about an abandoned library that still remained intact. It was said to be an old library once owned by a noble family that mysteriously disappeared centuries ago. The reason the library was left behind was because it contained strange books that the authorities at the time believed could pose a danger. We arrived at the library one afternoon, as the sunlight faded and the atmosphere grew somewhat gloomy. The large door creaked as we pushed it open. Inside, the space was quiet and covered in dust, yet there were still many ancient books on the wooden shelves. The surroundings felt like a still life painting, with no sign of life. However, what struck us as strange was the feeling that the place never stopped being silent. No sound of wind, no insects, just an absolute quiet. I felt as though something was watching us from afar. Particularly, there was an old book open on the reading table, its pages yellowed, as if no one had touched it in a long time. As we ventured deeper into the library, I began to feel an eerie coldness. Every step seemed to draw us closer to a hidden corner of the library, where the bookshelves were covered in dust, and only dim light from an old oil lamp illuminated the space. One of us, Matt, found a small door beside a bookshelf. It led down to a dark, wooden staircase. When Matt pushed the door open, we heard a loud creak, as if something heavy had been moved. Despite our hesitations, we decided to go down. As we descended, the air grew colder, and I could clearly feel that something was waiting for us down there. Everyone started to shiver, but we were all determined to continue exploring. We reached a basement room where the old bookshelves were arranged in a strange way, as if someone had deliberately placed them in an unusually odd pattern. But what I couldn't forget was a large wooden table in the center of the room, with an open book on it. The strange thing was, the text in this book didn't resemble any language we had ever seen. We began to feel uncomfortable. Matt walked up to the table and opened the book to read. Immediately, a loud noise came from above, as if someone was walking on the ceiling. The sound terrified us, and when we looked up, we saw a large dark shadow moving across the ceiling. Suddenly, the oil lamp in my hand flared up brightly, then went out, leaving us in complete darkness. We tried to find an exit, but it seemed like the space had changed. The door leading to the staircase had vanished, replaced by a cold, slippery wall. We were in panic, unsure of what to do. But then, a low voice echoed in the darkness, "Thank you for coming." When we turned around, no one was there, only the shadowy figures reflected on the bookshelves. We searched desperately to escape the room, but everything seemed locked in place. Then, suddenly, the space became eerily silent again, leaving us bewildered. Eventually, we managed to escape to the surface and paused to catch our breath. Since then, none of us dared to return to that library. Since then, the old library has remained abandoned, and no one knows what really happened beneath its floors. You've just listened to the Whispers from the Dark. If this story gave you chills or left a mark on your mind, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have your own terrifying real-life experience, Send it to Whispers in the Dark. Your voice might be the next to be heard in the shadows. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss another whisper. We'll meet again, in the dark.